Tim. And thank you for the invitation to come out on such a gorgeous day. And thanks for your attention throughout this event. Can you hear me okay?
This is for, because we're...
So since we're in the high school, I'm actually going to take the opportunity to ask you all a few questions. So I'm going to start off with the factors that are contributing to sea level rise around the globe and specifically here in Massachusetts. I'm looking for 4 factors. Does anyone want to take a guess as to any one of these elements that's contributing to higher waters around your community? You can just throw it out there. Go ahead. Absolutely. That's a great one.
What did you say?
Glacial melting. What else? This is where I get to test you all. Absolutely. Thermal expansion is another factor. 2 more that I'm looking for. Any other thoughts? We've got ice water melting and thermal expansion. What about land movements? Okay, and finally circulation. So Tim, go ahead and advance a couple slides there. So expanding water, go back one, Tim. Go back. So expanding water, obviously as the world's oceans warm, the energy is absorbed and we have expansion of the water. And that translates into the water being pushed up further onto our coastlines. In addition to that, here in Massachusetts, we also are experiencing some movement of our lands. We are experiencing subsidence, and both of these factors have been recorded in our tide gauge records. We have one gauge right downtown in Boston by the Barking Crab. This gauge has been installed since the early 1920s. So we have almost a century record here locally that has been recording this rise in sea level. And this record reflects both the rates that we are seeing globally as well as the subsidence of the land locally. If we look at the rates of the rise from this particular gauge, you'll notice that in the last few years we've actually seen an increase in the rates of rise of sea level. The rates from 2010 moving forward, we're going from 2.74 millimeters per year up to 2.79. When we're talking millimeters per year, that's not an insignificant rise. So what is really contributing to this acceleration? Go ahead, Tim. Two clicks there. So it's the melting ice, not only from the glaciers, but from the ice sheets. So you hear in the news a lot about Greenland and Antarctica. This is starting to become a major factor in terms of increasing the rate of rise that we've been experiencing along our coast. And with the melting of the glaciers and the ice sheets, we are also starting to see some shifts in circulation and how fresh water and salt water moves within our oceans and how different temperature gradients are affected. So this is a great graphic that many of you have probably seen. It's been out now for a few years. And this provides the consensus on where we might be moving in terms of sea level rise over the next century. And if you look at the bottom line, the lowest rate there, that's actually less than what we've been experiencing locally with our historic record. And moving up to the highest rate, that's over 6 times what we've seen historically here in Massachusetts. And if you poll all of the experts around the world on this issue, they feel roughly 90% confident that we're going to fall somewhere between 2 and 6 times what we've been experiencing already in our record. So go ahead, Tim. The good thing is that we do have an opportunity to work on our energy efficiency and the carbon mitigation issue. And we have the opportunity to try and track lower within this range of scenarios. We can, as a society, have an impact and try and keep us down around the 2 times our historic rate, rather than pushing up over 6 times or more. So I'm glad that you all are having this conversation now and putting such, strenuous thresholds on your community. The City of Gloucester and the Planning Department is taking this issue very seriously, and they have taken advantage of some state funding to look at the climate impacts specifically related to sea level rise. We provided a grant to the city to look at modeling sea level rise around the community to see how those impacts might affect infrastructure, and to have a discussion about how to retrofit those municipal facilities and infrastructure elements, and try and find financing to actually get some things done. There were some community workshops in the spring, and I'm actually curious, how many people here actually attended any of the presentations? So a few people. So I'm glad that I can help provide a little more information to the broader audience here. So prior to our project with the city, we have this information. So basically looking at our tide at mean high or high water and just stacking on static elevations at 1-foot increments and looking at the extent of potential coastal flooding as a result. You'll notice that go back, Tim. You'll notice that you really start to see a more widespread impact once we get over the 2-foot sea level rise scenario. Once we reach into the 3, 4, 5, and 6 feet, that's when you start to see a more widespread impact of low-lying coastal roads and facilities. So with the grant project, Tim, we really wanted to look at not just future high tides, but also future extreme storm events with the higher tides. So the city was fortunate enough to be able to use the funding to secure the services of a consulting firm to do some dynamic modeling, to actually push storm surge up around the shoreline given different types of storm events, and to look at where that water might end up and how high it might be. So the city was interested in looking at a couple of different targets. They considered the 2030 and 2070 sea level rise scenarios for their analysis, and those roughly fall within 0.7 feet of rise and 3.4 feet. So we don't really need to tie ourselves to a specific time point. We're really allowing ourselves to look at the differences in elevation. Kleinfelder was the consulting firm that developed these maps for the community, and I'm going to provide you just with a few examples here. This is the more short-term analysis, the 2030 at the 0.7 feet of rise, with a major storm event. So that 1% chance storm event of happening in a given year. And the red lines that you're seeing on the map are coastal roads that are experiencing inundation during that coastal storm event in the future. The yellow dots are facilities that are starting to see some low threshold flooding as a result of those storm events. And if you look at the legend on the far side, you can see the depth of water around those facilities. So we're starting to see upwards of 5 feet of flooding in some cases, even at this low threshold scenario. If we look at the same area in 2070, you can see that the impact on the roads is much more significant, and the water depths are getting higher around the facilities. And we're talking pump stations that are controlling sewer around the community. We're talking about dams and public work facilities, very essential elements of the community in keeping the area healthy and safe. So another scenario at the 2030 with the major storm events, again, coastal roads flooding. We have the high school called out in this one, so you can orient yourselves. And then 2070, Tim. You can see the depth of water increasing and the extent of the road impact much greater. So neighborhoods are going to start to get cut off during major storm events, and you may start to see some difficulty with emergency services getting into areas. Looking down around the harbor, the red lines again are the coastal roads that are being inundated. This is again the 2030 scenario with that major storm event, and then the 2070. So we're seeing everything from nuisance flooding at that half foot to foot level all the way up to greater than 10 feet of inundation. So 10 feet of water above your ground surface in some locations during a major event with the 2070 scenario. We can also look at it down around some of our natural resource areas, and again, pump stations that are associated in those neighborhoods, 2030 and then 2070. The 2070, go back, Tim, in this one, you can see is really starting to translate much further inland across this marsh area, and will be impacting residents as well as infrastructure. So Tim? Here we're looking at it in a little bit more detail. Just chose to zoom in on where we're sitting. And this is the high school. You can see the bands of water depth translating in towards the facility. And then 2070, this is the threshold where we're actually going to see water starting to come in the doors of the building. So, when was the high school built?
I don't know how when it was built, but it was rehabbed just 8 years ago. 47.
So this now is going to provide the community with an opportunity to start thinking about ways to retrofit the facility in terms of flood walls around the doors or other barriers that you can drop in place during major storm events, and also other mechanisms in order to make sure that your public investment isn't going to see major losses. So the city is moving forward with the recommendations that came out of this report, and again, the planning department is really the lead on this. So, if you're excited about the work that was done and really want to engage in the conversation in terms of adaptation, I really encourage you to get in touch with Matt and Greg Catamatori and get involved. So I just want to close by pointing you to a few resources. The document on the left is the project report. The city has this up on the website, so if you just Google it, you'll find it. And then also, our office has a guidance document on understanding sea level rise records and projections and how to think about addressing sea level rise in project planning. So that document is also up on our website if you look for it. So I want to wrap there and answer any questions you might have.
How many coastal communities have done a similar study, and where does Gloucester rank relative to the rest of coastal communities?
So we actually launched our Coastal Resilience Grant Program in January of 2014, so just over a year and a half ago. And we've provided coastal communities the opportunity of having a shot at over $8 million of funding. And we've actually funded 53 projects in a year and a half. Those 53 projects are flowing money to 35 communities. Gloucester's actually received 2 grants from us in that short amount of time. So Gloucester is very proactive on this issue. We're very happy to partner with the planning department and look forward to future projects. In terms of looking at the vulnerability, I have to say that you are in a better place than some other communities. You know, you're not as low-lying as Plum Island or down around the Cape and Islands. You do have some vertical relief here that's going to provide you some vertical buffer from those kind of nuisance flooding events, so those 1 or 2 foot threshold events. But once we start moving out in the 2030, 2050 time frame, and if we start tracking higher on the range of projections, that's when the coastal storm events are going to become a serious issue in the community. Yep. Come on up. Yeah.
I was just wondering for families and individuals that have homes that are very close to the water, what individuals can do to, in the event of this, what kind of precautionary measures they can take to protect our investments.
So the capital investment that the state has made on this issue is directly focused on public safety and infrastructure and jobs. So unfortunately, the residents aren't eligible for financing through our program. The money has to flow to communities. However, communities can sponsor projects that engage the larger residency and business sector. And some communities are looking at trying to come up with ways to provide grants to homeowners to elevate in order to be able to accommodate coastal storm events with a higher reach. And we actually just had a discussion with the community of Salem just last week on this issue. There are ways to retrofit your home either vertically or you could look at potentially moving landward depending on how large your lot is and how much relief you have on your property as well. But if you don't want to go that drastic of a step, there are ways to redirect floodwater with vegetation and swales and other things. So we actually have a coastal landscaping guide on our website if you want to look that up. I don't know what the nature of your property might be, but we can have a more specific discussion later if you would like some ideas. Yeah. Go ahead. Here you go. Come on up.
Have other Cape Ann communities applied for grants?
The other Cape Ann communities, no. Gloucester is the leader. In terms of the larger North Shore community, we do have a project that's funded with the Great Marsh ecosystem, and Gloucester and the other Cape Ann communities are part of that effort. And there's actually going to be a workshop coming up the end of the month. I can get you the date of that if you want to attend. The folks that are organizing that are mostly the Ipswich River Watershed Association in partnership with the National Wildlife Federation. They're looking at ways that natural resources can provide a better buffer given climate change impacts, and how that can also get tied into infrastructure retrofits and larger adaptation measures in the community. So I will be sure to get you the information on that workshop and that project. Any other questions? Come on up.
Julia, I'm curious whether any efforts that communities make to reduce carbon footprint, let's say that there was a very successful national effort. What would the time frame be of any change that might make these scenarios less serious and extreme? I mean, if everybody works really hard for the next 10 years, is there a chance that that 2070 picture that you painted could be different, or is the response going to be slower than that?
The ocean has actually done a really good job of absorbing a lot of the thermal energy coming from the warming air temperatures, and as a result, there definitely are going to be some residual increases in sea level rise even if we, halted all of our post-industrial revolution impacts at this point. So that's why I say that the doubling of our historic rate is really kind of, our minimum trajectory in terms of what people think is, pretty likely. But above that, that's where we really have the opportunity to control the outcome.
Thank you. I have a question about whether or not the rising sea level, the impact of the rising sea levels on the dog bar breakwater have been looked at yet. And whether, because right, it's in most storms, the water's coming over.
The breakwater was actually one of the facilities that was looked at as part of the planning department's project with the consultants. And if you pull up the project report, there's actually some good details in there in terms of the different elevation thresholds and how that facility could be retrofitted. Any other questions? Well, thank you for this lively discussion and your attendance today.